A billionaire let two homeless girls spend the night on his yacht. The next day, he was shocked by what they had done. The sun was setting on the horizon of Newport, painting the sky with shades of orange and red. In the harbor, one yacht stood out among all the others. The Solitaire, a 165-foot yacht, was a naval masterpiece that perfectly suited its owner, Thomas Laurent. At 30 years old, Thomas was the epitome of success in the eyes of the world. A billionaire and owner of a financial empire that made veteran tycoons tremble, he had achieved more in one decade than many dream of accomplishing in a lifetime. Yet, as he gazed at the city from the deck of his yacht, his green eyes reflected a chill that contrasted with the warmth of the East Coast sunset. The interior of the Solitaire was a testament to Thomas's wealth and refined taste. Exotic woods covered the walls, contrasting with brushed metal details. The main salon boasted an impressive collection of rare wines, a seating area with Italian leather sofas, and a dining table that could comfortably seat 12, though Thomas rarely hosted more than 1 or 2 guests at a time. Descending the stairs to his onboard office, Thomas turned on the computer. The screen quickly filled with charts, quotes, and reports. This was how he spent most of his days, immersed in numbers, deals, and strategies to further increase his fortune. A commotion on the pier caught his attention. Harbor workers were rushing back and forth, securing boats and checking equipment. Thomas frowned, noticing for the first time the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Mr. Laurent," the voice of Captain Morris broke the silence. "There's a storm warning. I recommend we move the yacht to a more sheltered mooring." Thomas hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the increasingly threatening sky. "That won't be necessary, Captain. I'll take care of the yacht myself tonight." "But sir, the forecast indicates—" "That's all, Captain." Thomas cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can go home. I'll be fine." As the captain left reluctantly, Thomas turned his attention toward the city. Lights were starting to come on, creating a fascinating contrast against the darkening sky. Families gathered for dinner, couples strolled along the waterfront. Life continued its normal course. Thomas watched it all with an almost clinical detachment, as though watching a movie of a life that wasn't his. The wind began to pick up, howling between the masts of the boats. The once gentle waves were now hitting the Solitaire's hull with greater force. Thomas remained on the deck, defying the elements. His mind wandered over the day's events, endless meetings, relentless negotiations, numbers upon numbers dancing across computer screens. A flash lit up the sky, followed seconds later by a deafening thunderclap. Rain began to fall, first as sparse droplets, then quickly turning into thick sheets of water. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the rain wash over him. His designer suit, worth more than many earned in a year, was soaked in seconds. The yacht rocked more violently, challenging the ropes that held it to the dock. Thomas opened his eyes, watching the city lights being swallowed by the storm. It was as if the world were disappearing, leaving him truly alone for the first time. In that moment, surrounded by nature's fury, Thomas Laurent felt something he had not experienced in a long time. Vulnerability, not physical fear of the storm, but a sudden awareness of his own insignificance before nature's might. A particularly strong lightning strike illuminated the sky, revealing for an instant Thomas's solitary figure against the storm. Then, as quickly as it came, the light vanished, consumed by darkness. Thomas staggered to the main cabin, drenched and shivering. His reflection in the mirror surprised him. Disheveled hair, wide eyes, the mask of control and indifference completely stripped away. The yacht groaned and creaked under the storm's unyielding assault. Thomas collapsed into a leather armchair, his body exhausted, his mind in turmoil. The walls he had built around himself, the carefully erected defenses over the years, seemed frail against the brute force of nature. As the night wore on and the storm raged outside, Thomas faced his own inner tempest. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to question the path he had chosen. What truly mattered in his life? What had he gained besides a colossal bank account and a luxurious yacht that now felt so insignificant against the sea's fury? The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Thomas remained motionless, letting the long-avoided questions wash over him like waves. Success, power, wealth, all seemed empty and meaningless as the wind howled and the waves crashed against the hull. The storm continued to grow in intensity, mirroring Thomas's internal turmoil. Every thunderclap felt like an unanswered question, every lightning bolt briefly illuminating the shadows of a life dedicated to accumulating wealth, yet devoid of real connections and genuine purpose. As dawn approached, Thomas Laurent, the solitary billionaire, faced not only the physical storm battering his yacht, but also the emotional storm threatening to dismantle everything he believed about himself and the world. What tomorrow would bring, he did not know. But one thing was certain: after this night, nothing would ever be the same. The roar of the storm had subsided to a distant murmur when Thomas awoke with a start. For a moment, he was disoriented, his eyes trying to adjust to the cabin's darkness. A glance at the platinum watch on his wrist showed it was 3:47 a.m. Another sound, different from the wind or the waves, caught his attention. Was that crying? Intrigued and slightly alarmed, Thomas stood up, his muscles protesting after hours in the same position. Cautiously, he went up to the deck. The rain had dwindled to a light drizzle, and the wind was now just a gentle breeze. That's when he saw them, two small figures huddled near the yacht stairs, trembling and sobbing softly. Thomas blinked several times, certain he was having some kind of fatigue-induced hallucination, but the figures remained there, very real and clearly in trouble. Approaching slowly, he realized they were two little girls, identical twins, no more than 4 years old. They were completely soaked, their dark brown hair plastered to their pale faces. They wore what looked like cotton pajamas, now drenched and dirty, with faded unicorn prints. One of them, Thomas couldn't tell which, clung desperately to a battered backpack, almost as big as she was. The other had a small cut on her forehead, a thin line of blood mixing with the rainwater. "Hello?" Thomas called hesitantly, his voice rough from disuse. The girls started, looking at him with wide, fearful eyes. For a moment, no one moved. It's okay," Thomas tried again, feeling completely out of his depth. "I won't hurt you." Slowly, as if dealing with frightened animals, Thomas approached. The girls pressed closer to each other but did not run. "How did you get here?" he asked, crouching down to their level. The girl with the backpack sniffled, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. We got lost," she murmured. "Where are your parents?" The two exchanged a look Thomas couldn't decipher. The girl with the cut on her forehead spoke this time, her voice almost a whisper. "We don't have parents." Thomas's heart, one he swore had turned to ice after years in the business world, gave a painful jolt. 1,000 questions flooded his mind, but he pushed them aside. Getting the children warm was the most important thing now. "Come on," he said, extending a hand. "Let's go inside and get you dry." The girls hesitated a moment, but their cold and exhaustion trumped their fear. They followed Thomas into the yacht, leaving little puddles of water wherever they walked. In the cabin's light, Thomas got a better look at the twins. Despite the dirt and the sorry state of their clothes, they were beautiful children, with large brown eyes and chubby cheeks that, under different circumstances, would likely be flushed with health. "What are your names?" Thomas asked, searching for towels in a cabinet. "I'm Sophie," said the girl with the backpack. "And I'm Marie," added the other. Thomas nodded, handing each a soft towel. "I'm Thomas, you must be hungry." As if to confirm his words, one of the girls' stomachs growled audibly. Despite the surreal situation, Thomas couldn't help but smile. While the girls dried off, Thomas prepared hot chocolate and found some crackers. It wasn't exactly a nutritious meal, but it would have to do for now. Sophie and Marie ate ravenously, breaking Thomas's heart. How long had it been since they'd had a proper meal? Watching them, Thomas found himself facing a dilemma. What should he do? The right thing, logically, would be to call the authorities immediately. These girls clearly needed professional help. trained social workers who specialize in at-risk children, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the look of trust the twins gave him between bites of crackers, or maybe it was the way Sophie still clung to the battered backpack as if it were her most precious possession. "You can stay here tonight," Thomas heard himself say, surprising even himself. "Tomorrow morning, we'll figure out what to do." The relief on the girls' faces was palpable. They exchanged glances again, carrying on a silent conversation Thomas couldn't decipher. Carefully, he cleaned and dressed the cut on Marie's forehead, mentally thanking the well-stocked first aid kit he kept on board. The next challenge was finding dry clothes for the twins. Thomas ended up improvising with 2 of his cotton t-shirts, which fit them like dresses. Setting up a place for them to sleep was another adventure. Though the yacht was luxurious, it wasn't equipped for children. Thomas arranged the sofa in the main salon with pillows and blankets, creating a kind of cozy nest. Sophie and Marie settled in, still clinging to each other. The mysterious backpack was placed carefully by their side. "Good night," Thomas said softly, feeling strangely protective. "If you need anything, I'll be right over there." The girls nodded sleepily, their eyes already closing. Within minutes, they were sound asleep, their small faces finally relaxed and peaceful. Thomas retired to his own cabin, but sleep would not come. His mind churned with unanswered questions. Who were these children? Where had they come from? How did they end up on his yacht in the middle of a storm? More importantly, what would he do in the morning? Lying in the darkness, Thomas Laurent, the man who had built a financial empire on cold, calculated decisions, felt utterly lost. For the first time in years, he had no plan and no answers. The soft sound of the girls' breathing reached him, a constant reminder of the unexpected responsibility that had fallen into his lap. As the sky slowly lightened, signaling the start of a new day, Thomas finally drifted off to a restless sleep, certain of only one thing. His life had changed irreversibly in the last few hours, and there was no going back. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Thomas awoke, feeling as if he'd slept only a few minutes. For a moment, he lay still, trying to organize his jumbled thoughts. Then the memory of the previous night struck him like lightning. The girls. He sprang to his feet, heart pounding. Had it all been a bizarre dream brought on by the storm? Exiting his cabin, Thomas stopped short, his jaw dropping. The interior of the yacht, once a masterpiece of minimalist, luxurious design, had been transformed. Colorful drawings covered the walls, taped up with who knows what they'd found. Paper flowers, surprisingly well folded for such small hands, hung from the ceiling and decorated every available surface. In the middle of this colorful chaos, Sophie and Marie were happily playing, still wearing Thomas's oversized t-shirts. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," they exclaimed in unison when they saw him, their faces lit by radiant smiles. Thomas blinked multiple times, trying to process the surreal scene before him. Good morning," he finally managed to say. "Did you do all this?" Sophie nodded proudly. "We wanted to thank you for letting us stay. Your house is very pretty, but it was a bit sad." "Now it's happier," Marie agreed, adding shyly, "We hope you don't mind." Thomas glanced around at the rainbow drawings of unicorns, flowers, and what appeared to be a caricature of himself, though with a much bigger smile than he had ever worn in real life. Surprisingly, instead of annoyance, he felt a wave of warmth spread through his chest. "It's colorful," he commented, a small smile creeping across his lips. The relief on the girls' faces was obvious. Thomas cleared his throat, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. "Well, how about we have some breakfast?" The simple task of preparing breakfast for 2 4-year-olds proved to be a challenge for Thomas. His fridge, usually stocked only with gourmet pre-prepared meals and champagne, offered little that was suitable for children. After some improvisation, he managed to serve cereal with milk, some fruit, and orange juice. The girls devoured it enthusiastically, chattering happily about their drawings and plans for more decorations. Thomas watched them, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts in his mind. What should he do now? Logically, He ought to call the authorities and let the professionals handle it, but something was holding him back. The trust he saw in the twins' eyes, the way they seemed to blossom after just one night of care. "Girls," he began hesitantly, "would you like to come with me to my house? I mean, my real house, on land." Sophie and Marie exchanged looks, another silent conversation passing between them. Then they turned to Thomas with identical smiles. "Yes, please." The decision was made. Thomas could hardly believe what he was doing, but something inside him insisted it was right, at least for now. Getting ready to leave was an adventure in itself. Thomas, used to having assistants handle every detail of his life, found himself running around trying to gather what the girls might need. Sophie's battered backpack held only a few changes of clothes, all in a state as pitiful as the pajamas from the previous night. Improvising again, Thomas found 2 of his plainest polo shirts, which would serve as dresses for the twins. With slim belts, he managed to make them look less like shapeless sacks. The drive to the Laurent estate felt surreal. Thomas, normally so composed and in control, felt as nervous as a teenager. Sophie and Marie, on the other hand, were thrilled, their little faces pressed to the car windows, taking in every detail of the coastal roads near Newport. When the imposing gates of the Laurent property swung open, Thomas felt his heart race. What was he doing? How would he explain this? The girls' reaction to the mansion was pure wonder. Their wide eyes took in the majestic columns, the perfectly manicured gardens, and the ornate fountains. "It's a castle," Marie exclaimed, mouth agape. "Are you a prince, Mr. Thomas?" Sophie asked, her voice full of awe. Thomas couldn't help but laugh. "No, I'm not a prince. I'm just, well, it's complicated." As they approached the main entrance, Thomas spotted his butler, Philip, waiting with a faintly masked look of surprise. Other staff members peeked discreetly through windows, curious about the unexpected visitors. "Mr. Laurent," Philip greeted, his tone perfectly controlled despite the obvious confusion in his eyes. "We weren't expecting you back so soon, and I see we have guests." Thomas cleared his throat, feeling oddly self-conscious. "Yes, Philip. This is Sophie and Marie. They'll be staying with us for a while." The experienced butler merely raised an eyebrow, years of training preventing him from asking the many questions clearly dancing in his mind. "Very well, sir. Shall I prepare the guest rooms?" "Ah, yes, please." And Philip, "Yes, sir. We'll need some things for the girls. Clothes, toys, whatever 4-year-olds need. Can you take care of it?" "Certainly, sir. I'll see to it immediately." As Philip left to carry out his orders, other staff members approached, some offering help, others simply curious to see the unexpected young visitors. Thomas found himself improvising vague explanations. "Daughters of a friend. Complicated situation. They'll be here for a while." The words sounded false even to his own ears, but nobody dared question him. Sophie and Marie, oblivious to the stir they were causing, were mesmerized by every detail of the mansion. Their eyes shone as they took in the paintings on the walls, the sculptures in the corridors, the luxurious carpets beneath their bare feet. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie gently tugged on his sleeve, "can we draw here too? To make it happier, like the boat?" Thomas looked around at the antique furniture, the priceless artworks, the painstakingly curated decor that had cost a fortune. Then he looked at the hopeful faces of the twins. "You know what?" he said, surprising even himself. "I think this house could use a little more color." The smiles he received in response warmed his heart in a way no financial acquisition ever had. As he led the girls to what would be their temporary bedroom, Thomas found himself thinking that, for the first time in years, the Laurent mansion felt like a home. What the future held, he didn't know. But at that moment, with 2 small hands holding his, Thomas Laurent felt that maybe, just maybe, he had found something far more valuable than any deal he had ever closed. The adventure was only beginning, and he could hardly wait to see where it would lead. The Laurent mansion, once a monument to luxury and solitude, now echoed with the sound of children's laughter and hurried footsteps. Sophie and Marie, their eyes wide with wonder, explored every corner of the property as though they were adventurers in a magical land. Thomas followed them, a blend of anxiety and fascination on his face. Every piece of art, every antique piece of furniture, every architectural detail he had long overlooked now took on new life through the eyes of the twins. "Look, Marie," Sophie exclaimed, pointing to an enormous Venetian mirror. "It's like a portal to another world," Marie laughed, making faces at her reflection. "Do you think there are fairies on the other side?" Thomas, watching them, felt an involuntary smile forming on his lips. "Maybe," he found himself saying, "but I think the real fairies are on this side of the mirror." The girls turned to him, their faces illuminated by radiant smiles. For a moment, Thomas felt as though time had stopped, captured by the purity of that shared moment of joy. Shaking himself mentally, Thomas guided them to what would be their temporary room. Philip, always efficient, had already transformed one of the guest rooms into a space worthy of a fairy tale. The walls, once a neutral beige, now displayed a delicate mural of an enchanted forest. 2 canopy beds, small and perfect for the twins, stood at the center of the room, covered with colorful quilts and an abundance of soft pillows. A toy chest overflowed with plush animals, dolls, and games, while a bookshelf filled with children's books promised countless adventures. Sophie and Marie froze at the doorway, their eyes roaming every detail in awe. Is this for us?" Marie asked in a whisper, as though afraid that speaking loudly might make it all vanish. Thomas nodded, feeling a strange emotion in his throat. "Yes, it's all yours." The girls looked at each other for a moment before running inside, laughing and bouncing on the cozy beds. Thomas watched them, a warm sensation spreading through his chest. It was as if he were seeing color for the first time after a life in black and white. The first meals they shared together were surreal experiences for Thomas. The enormous dining hall, once the site of formal dinners and tense business negotiations, now resonated with laughter and animated chatter. Sophie and Marie asked 1,000 questions about everything from the silverware to the paintings on the walls. "Mr. Thomas, why do you eat alone at such a big table?" Sophie asked innocently, playing with her peas. Thomas paused, his knife halfway to his plate. Well, I'm usually busy with work." Marie tilted her head, curious. "But isn't it sad to eat by yourself?" The question hit Thomas like a punch in the stomach. He glanced around at the massive table, the empty chairs, and for the first time, he realized how lonely his life had become. "Yes," he admitted softly, "I guess it is a bit sad." The twins exchanged looks, and then Sophie declared cheerfully, "Well, now you don't have to eat alone anymore." Thomas smiled, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. "No, I guess I don't." The following days were a whirlwind of new experiences for Thomas. Once accustomed to closing corporate mergers and million-dollar deals, he now faced challenges like bathing 2 energetic girls, learning how to untangle hair without causing tears, and discovering the crucial difference between the right unicorn and the wrong one when choosing clothes. Each small victory, a tear-free hair combing, a meal completed without mishaps, a bedtime story successfully read, brought him a sense of accomplishment no successful business deal had ever given him. Aware of his limitations, Thomas discreetly hired a nanny, Mrs. Elise, a kind older woman with decades of experience. She quickly grew fond of the twins, bringing much-needed structure to their new routine in the mansion. Yet, for all the help Mrs. Elise provided, Thomas found himself longing for the moments he spent alone with Sophie and Marie. There was something magical about seeing the world through their eyes, rediscovering joy in the simplest of things. But not everything was smiles and fun. Thomas still wrestled with the mystery of the girls' origins. His attempts to learn more about their past were invariably met with evasive answers or clearly imaginative stories. "Where did you come from before you got to my boat?" he asked one night, tucking them into bed. Sophie and Marie exchanged looks, another silent conversation passing between them. Then Marie answered, her eyes shining. "We came from the Cloud Kingdom. It's a magical place where houses float and everyone rides on winged unicorns." Thomas sighed, torn between frustration and admiration for the girl's vivid imaginations. "And your parents? Where are they?" Sophie's smile faltered for a moment. They had to stay behind. To take care of the unicorns, you know." Thomas knew he was far from the truth, but the flicker of sadness in the twins' eyes kept him from pushing further. Instead, he hugged them, feeling their small bodies relax against him. "Well, I'm glad you ended up here," he said softly. "We are too, Mr. Thomas," Marie murmured sleepily. "Your castle is almost as cool as the Cloud Kingdom." While the girls slept, Thomas stayed seated at the bedside, watching their peaceful faces. The mystery of their past still bothered him. But at that moment, it seemed less important than the present they were building together. The Laurent mansion, once a cold and impersonal place, now pulsed with life. Colorful drawings adorned the corridor walls, toys appeared in the most unexpected places, and the sound of laughter echoed through halls that had been silent for too long. Thomas found himself smiling more, laughing openly, rediscovering a part of himself that had been buried beneath layers of ambition and isolation. Business meetings and formal dinners, once the center of his life, now seemed pale compared to daily adventures with Sophie and Marie. One afternoon, as he watched the twins chasing butterflies in the garden, laughing non-stop, Thomas was struck by a powerful realization. These two little strangers, who had literally shown up out of nowhere, had brought more joy and meaning to his life in a matter of days than he had experienced in years. The magnitude of that understanding nearly took his breath away. What had started as an impulsive act of compassion was swiftly becoming the center of his world. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie called, running toward him with her hands full of daisies, "we made you a flower crown." Thomas knelt, allowing the girls to place the makeshift crown on his head. As they laughed and clapped, declaring him king of the garden, he felt an overwhelming wave of emotion that almost knocked him off his feet. In that moment, flowers in his hair and his heart overflowing with a love he hadn't known he was capable of, Thomas Laurent made a silent vow. Whatever the future held, he would protect these girls with everything he had. Somehow, amid the chaos and mystery, he had found something too precious to measure or bargain for. He had found a family. Dawn's light was barely filtering through the library curtains when Thomas softly closed the door behind him. Glancing around the hallway to ensure he was alone, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Dubois," a deep voice answered on the other end. "I need your services," Thomas spoke quietly, even though he knew he was alone. "It's a delicate matter." "It always is, Mr. Laurent. What's this about?" Thomas hesitated for a moment. "Two girls, twins. I need to know everything about them." There was a pause on the other end. "I understand. Absolute discretion, as always." "Thank you, Dubois. I'll send you what details I have via encrypted email." Ending the call, Thomas exhaled heavily. Hiring a private investigator hadn't been an easy decision, but he needed answers. The mystery surrounding Sophie and Marie consumed him, even as his affection for the girls grew day by day. Leaving the library, Thomas was greeted by a sound that would have been completely foreign in the Laurent mansion just weeks earlier: children's laughter. Following it, he found Sophie and Marie in the living room, turning what had once been a formal, austere space into a makeshift playground. Italian silk cushions, once meticulously arranged on the sofas, now formed an elaborate fort. An ancient Ming dynasty vase served as a hiding place for a doll. In the center of it all, the twins laughed and played, their eyes sparkling with contagious joy. Thomas stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. It was as if the mansion itself had come to life. The walls, once silent witnesses to formal dinners and tense negotiations, now rang with laughter and fantastic stories. "Mr. Thomas," Marie exclaimed upon noticing him, "come see our magic castle." Smiling, Thomas joined them, carefully navigating the lava rivers made of silk scarves. As he played, his gaze fell on the battered backpack Sophie always kept close. Curiosity gnawed at him. What could be inside that was so important? "Sophie," he began casually, "what do you keep in that backpack? It must be very special." The girls exchanged glances, engaging in another silent conversation. "They're magical treasures," Sophie finally answered. "They protect us." "Protect you from what?" Thomas pressed gently. Marie jumped in quickly. "From the monsters in the dark, of course. But don't worry, Mr. Thomas, your castle is safe." Thomas nodded, realizing he wasn't going to get more information at that moment. The real story behind that backpack remained a mystery, as did the girl's past. That night, as Thomas worked in his office, a piercing scream shattered the mansion's silence. He leaped to his feet, heart pounding, and rushed to the girl's bedroom. Sophie sat up in bed, tears streaming down her face, while Marie tried to comfort her. Thomas approached cautiously. "Sophie, what happened, sweetheart?" The little girl sobbed, instinctively reaching out for him. Surprised at how natural it felt, Thomas scooped her into his arms. It was just a bad dream," Sophie murmured against his chest. "Want to tell me about it?" Thomas asked softly, stroking her hair. Sophie shook her head, tightening her grip on him. "No, I can't. It's a secret." Thomas met Marie's worried gaze. He knew there was more to these so-called nightmares than ordinary childhood fears, but now wasn't the time to push. "It's all right," he whispered, rocking Sophie gently. "You're safe here. I promise." In that moment, feeling Sophie's small body relax in his arms and seeing the trust in Marie's eyes, Thomas was overwhelmed by a fierce protective instinct. He would do anything to keep these girls safe and happy. In the days that followed, the mansion's transformation only accelerated. Driven by a desire to create a truly welcoming environment for the twins, Thomas began making subtle but significant changes. The main corridor, once lined with somber paintings of Laurent ancestors, now featured a colorful gallery of Sophie and Marie's drawings. The music room, silent for years, was equipped with children's instruments and echoed with off-key but joyful melodies. The garden, once a showroom of perfectly trimmed hedges, now included an elaborate playground, complete with swings, slides, and a treehouse that would be the envy of any child and many adults. The mansion's staff, initially shocked by these changes, soon found themselves caught up in the new atmosphere. The housekeeper, Mrs. Lefebvre, was spotted smiling as she hung paper flower garlands from ancient chandeliers. The chef, Pierre, known for his fiery temper, was now heard humming cheerfully while making animal-shaped pancakes. The most notable transformation, however, was in Thomas himself. The man who once rarely smiled now laughed openly, ran around the garden playing tag, and sat on the floor of the library reading stories in silly voices. Philip, the ever-discreet butler, couldn't help but remark to Mrs. Elisa, the nanny, "In all my years of service, I've never seen Mr. Laurent is alive." Mrs. Elise smiled, watching Thomas swing the twins around, their laughter echoing through the hall. "Children have that power," she said wisely. "They remind us of what really matters in life." At night, after tucking the twins into bed, Thomas often wandered the mansion's corridors, marveling at the transformation. Every corner, once cold and impersonal, now pulsed with warmth and love. Pausing before an ornate mirror, Thomas barely recognized the man looking back at him. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now shone with a light he hadn't seen in years. His features, usually tense under the weight of corporate responsibilities, were relaxed, with laugh lines beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. In that silent moment of reflection, Thomas realized it wasn't just the mansion that was changing. He himself was changing, rediscovering parts of himself that had long been buried beneath ambition and isolation. On his way to his own room, Thomas paused outside the girl's door. Peeking in, he saw Sophie and Marie peacefully asleep, their small hands clasped together, even in slumber. A gentle smile spread across his face. The mystery surrounding the twins still intrigued him, and he knew there were challenges ahead. But in that moment, gazing at their sleeping forms, Thomas felt a certainty he'd never experienced in all his years of corporate success. These girls, who had appeared in his life as if by magic, were now his entire world. and he would do whatever it took to protect and nurture the happiness they had brought to Laurent Mansion, and to his own heart. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Laurent Mansion stirred to life for another day. Where once a sepulchral silence reigned until late morning, now it was filled with hurried footsteps and children's laughter. Thomas, who in times past only left his bed after multiple alarms, found himself awake and invigorated, eager to start the day with Sophie and Marie. The new routine that had taken shape over the past few weeks was so different from his former life that he sometimes wondered if he was living in an elaborate dream. Breakfast, once a solitary and rushed affair, had become a lively, chaotic event. Thomas found himself laughing as he tried to prevent cereal from flying across the table, or help the girls spread jam on their toast without coating the entire kitchen in the process. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie asked between bites of toast, "can we have a picnic today?" "In the rose garden," Marie chimed in enthusiastically. Thomas smiled, wiping a bit of jam from Marie's chin. "Of course. How about after our morning reading session?" The girls cheered, their eyes sparkling with excitement. Thomas's heart warmed at the sight. How was it possible that just weeks ago his life revolved exclusively around numbers, contracts, and negotiations? After breakfast, they headed to the library. Once a sanctuary of austere knowledge, it was now a cozy space scattered with colorful cushions and entire shelves dedicated to children's books. Thomas settled into his favorite armchair, with Sophie and Marie nestled at his side. Together, they embarked on another literary adventure, Thomas providing different voices for each character, much to the twins' delight. "Mr. Thomas," Marie interrupted at one point, "did you have anyone to read stories to you when you were little?" The question caught Thomas off guard. Memories of his own childhood, long buried, began to surface. "Well, yes, my mother used to read to me every night." "Where is your mother now?" Sophie asked innocently. Thomas hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt. She lives in another city. We don't see each other often." The girls exchanged glances, another silent conversation. "Do you miss her?" Marie asked softly. Thomas began, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "Yes, I guess I do." Sophie squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe you could call her. Tell her about us." Thomas smiled, touched by the suggestion. "Maybe I will, sweetheart." After reading time, they headed to the garden for the promised picnic. The day was perfect, with a cloudless blue sky and a gentle breeze rustling the roses. While Thomas spread out the blanket and arranged sandwiches and fruit prepared by the chef, Sophie and Marie ran around, their laughter echoing like music. "Look, Mr. Thomas," Sophie yelled, pointing to a butterfly that had landed on a nearby rose. "It's a fairy in disguise," Marie nodded solemnly. "They come to visit us sometimes, you know, to make sure we're okay." Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, really? And where do these fairies come from?" The girls exchanged knowing looks, that silent conversation again. "The Cloud Kingdom, of course," Marie replied, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. That Cloud Kingdom sounds like an interesting place," Thomas commented casually, hoping for more information. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, it's wonderful. It has rainbow waterfalls and cotton candy trees, and everyone rides on winged unicorns." Thomas smiled, torn between admiration for their vivid imaginations and frustration at his inability to discover the truth about their past. But seeing the joy on their faces, he decided to let the fantasy be, at least for now. That night, as Thomas walked the halls of the mansion after putting the girls to bed, he paused to admire the subtle yet profound changes that had occurred. The walls, once adorned only with classic paintings and antique tapestries, now displayed a bright gallery of children's drawings. Here a picture of him, drawn by Sophie, with an exaggerated smile and what appeared to be a crown. There, a depiction of what Marie called our happy family, 3 stick figures holding hands, one big and 2 small, surrounded by hearts and stars. Thomas felt a lump in his throat as he observed that particular drawing, family, It was a word that had long ago ceased to have real meaning for him. Now it echoed in his mind and heart with overwhelming force. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp cry from the girl's bedroom. Rushing in, he found Sophie sitting up, trembling and crying, while Marie tried to soothe her. "Shh, it's all right," Thomas murmured, seating himself on the bed and pulling Sophie onto his lap. "It was just a nightmare. You're safe here." As he held her, Thomas exchanged a worried look with Marie. These nightmares were happening more often, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they stemmed from more than just childhood fears. Slowly, Sophie calmed down, her breathing evening out. Thomas continued to hold her, softly humming a lullaby his own mother used to sing to him. Looking down at the two girls, one in his arms and the other leaning against him, Thomas was struck by a powerful realization. These children, who had entered his life so unexpectedly, had become his entire world. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of shared comfort was more precious than any business deal or acquisition. The Laurent mansion, formerly a symbol of his material success but also of his loneliness, now pulsed with life and love. The hallways, once silent, echoed with laughter and running footsteps. The gardens, once meticulously maintained but rarely enjoyed, now hosted daily adventures and wonderful discoveries. And Thomas hardly recognized himself. The cold, calculating man who lived only for the next big deal had given way to someone who found joy in telling stories, drying tears, and creating priceless memories every single day. As the girls finally drifted back to sleep, Thomas stayed beside them, embracing the peace of the moment. He knew there were still mysteries to solve, unanswered questions about Sophie and Marie's past. But right then, gazing at their serene faces, he felt a certainty he had never known. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Because somehow, amid all the chaos and mystery, Thomas Laurent had found something he didn't even know he was looking for. He had found a home. He had found a family. Thomas's phone vibrated discreetly during breakfast. He threw a quick glance at the screen, recognizing Dubois' number. His heart sped up, but he kept his composure, not wanting to alarm Sophie and Marie, who were busy decorating their plates with chocolate syrup. "Girls, how about you go play in the garden while I finish a few things here?" Thomas suggested, trying to sound casual. As soon as the twins ran off, laughing and bounding, Thomas answered the call, stepping into his office. "Dubois, what do you have for me?" "Mr. Laurent, I found something. The girls were enrolled in a primary school in Boston until about 3 months ago." Thomas felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Finally, a solid lead. "I sent you all the details via encrypted email, but there's something interesting I want to point out," Dubois continued. "The records mention a guardian, not parents. A woman named Claire Durand picked them up from school every day." The name meant nothing to Thomas, but he locked it in his memory. "Anything else about this Claire?" "Unfortunately, no. The address on file appears to be fake. I recommend you visit the school personally, Mr. Laurent. There may be more information that's not in the official records." Thomas thanked him and ended the call, his mind already formulating a plan. He had to see this school for himself, talk to the teachers, find out more about Sophie and Marie's mysterious past. 2 days later, Thomas stood in Boston, nearly unrecognizable in jeans, a simple t-shirt and sunglasses. The Boston Public Elementary School was a modest but well-maintained building in a middle-class neighborhood. Armed with a carefully crafted story about being the girl's distant uncle, Thomas secured a meeting with the principal, Mrs. Rogers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses. "Oh, Sophie and Marie," Mrs. Rogers exclaimed with a nostalgic smile. "Adorable children, so bright and creative. We were all sad when they stopped coming so suddenly." Thomas leaned forward, anxious. "What exactly happened?" The principal frowned, thinking, "It was strange, really. One day they just never showed up. We tried contacting Misty Durand-Sue, but the number we had no longer worked. And this Miss Durand, what can you tell me about her?" "Claire, oh, she was a lovely young woman. Always kind, though she sometimes seemed worried. We assumed she was the girl's mother, though she never explicitly confirmed it." Thomas absorbed every word, his heart racing with each new piece of information. And the girls never mentioned any other relatives? A father, perhaps? Mrs. Rogers shook her head. Not that I recall, but maybe their teacher, Ms. Brooks, can tell you more. She was very close to the twins. The conversation with Miss Brooks, a bright-eyed young teacher, added more puzzle pieces. Sophie and Marie were exceptional, she recounted enthusiastically. Very creative, always telling elaborate stories. But, she hesitated, lowering her voice, sometimes they said odd things. About having to hide, about bad people who wanted to get them. We thought it was just their wild imaginations. But now, Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. What exactly had happened to these girls? Leaving the school, Thomas had more questions than answers, but at least now he had a direction. The address might be fake, but it was a start. Following the lead, Thomas found himself in a run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston. Dilapidated buildings towered on either side of the narrow street, laundry hanging from makeshift lines between windows. The specific address led to a small apartment on the third floor of a run-down building. Thomas climbed the creaking stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. He knocked, but there was no reply. After a few minutes of waiting, an elderly lady stepped out of the adjacent apartment, eyeing him curiously. "Looking for the young Claire?" she asked, her voice husky from years of smoking. Thomas nodded, hopeful. "Yes." "Do you know her?" The older woman sighed. "I did. Sweet girl, that one. Always kind, even with all the troubles she had. She left here a few months back in the middle of the night, took the little ones with her, never saw them again." Thomas pulled out his phone, showing her a picture of Sophie and Marie. Were these the girls? The woman's eyes lit up with recognition. Yes, that's them. Adorable kids. Always so polite, but with sad eyes, you know, like they carried a weight too big for their little shoulders. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. "Do you have any idea where they might have gone?" She shook her head sadly. "No clue, son. But Claire looked scared those last few days. Always looking over her shoulder, like she was expecting something bad to happen any minute." Thanking the woman, Thomas descended the stairs, his mind swirling. Claire Durand, a mysterious guardian, a past filled with fear and running. And at the center of it all, Sophie and Marie, two innocent children bearing burdens far too heavy for their age. Walking back to his rental car, Thomas knew he was only scratching the surface of a much larger mystery. But one thing was certain. His determination to protect the twins and uncover the truth had only grown stronger. With a final glance at the crumbling building, Thomas climbed into the car and headed back home, to Sophie and Marie. The puzzle was far from complete, but he now had the first solid pieces. He wouldn't rest until he fit them all together, no matter the cost. The mansion's doorbell rang through the Laurent house on a peaceful Sunday morning, interrupting a calm day. Thomas, who was in the garden helping Sophie and Marie plant sunflowers, frowned. He wasn't expecting visitors. Philip will answer, he thought, returning his attention to the girls, who giggled as they filled their small watering cans. Moments later, however, Philip's tense voice echoed over the intercom. "Mr. Laurent, your parents are here." Thomas felt as though he had been punched in the gut. His parents, they never arrived unannounced. Something was wrong. "Girls," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "why don't you go play in your room for a bit? I need to speak with some people." Sophie and Marie exchanged looks, sensing the shift in his mood. Obediently, they got up and headed into the house, leaving a trail of muddy footprints behind. Thomas followed, his heart pounding harder with each step. Entering the living room, he found his parents, Georges Laurent, imposing as ever in his impeccable suit, and Elise Laurent, elegant but visibly tense. "Mother, father," Thomas greeted, trying to maintain composure. "What a surprise." "Surprise?" boomed Georges Laurent, his voice resonating through the room. "It's a surprise to us, Thomas." "What on earth is going on here?" Before Thomas could respond, The sound of children's laughter echoed from the hallway. All eyes turned to the door, where Sophie and Marie appeared, still dirty from gardening. Elise Laurent paled visibly. She staggered, bracing herself against a nearby armchair. "Oh my God," she whispered. George Laurent looked from the girls to Thomas, fury sparking in his eyes. "Explain yourself, son. Now." Thomas instinctively positioned himself between his parents and the twins. "Sophie, Marie, please go to your room. I'll be with you soon." The girls, sensing the tension in the air, obeyed quietly, casting worried glances at Thomas before disappearing down the hall. As soon as they were gone, George exploded. "What on earth are you thinking, Thomas? Do you realize the scandal this could cause? The risk to the company, to the family name? What are you talking about?" Thomas retorted, his own anger flaring. "They're just two children who need help." "Help?" George scoffed. "Since when do you care about helping anyone but yourself?" "No, there's something more here. Who really are those girls?" Thomas hesitated. Even he didn't fully know the truth about Sophie and Marie yet. They need me. That's all that matters right now." Elise, who had remained silent, finally spoke in a trembling voice. "Thomas, darling, you don't understand. This can't happen. Those girls can't stay here." There was something in his mother's voice, a desperate urgency, that made Thomas narrow his eyes. "Why not, Mother? What do you know about them?" Elise looked away, her hands shaking visibly. "Nothing. I know nothing. I just know that this is a terrible mistake." George put a hand on his wife's shoulder, his gaze fixed sternly on Thomas. "Listen, son, you need to step away from those children, immediately. There are things at stake here you don't understand." "What things?" Thomas demanded, frustration mounting. "What are you talking about?" "Mistakes from the past," Elise murmured, almost to herself. "Poor choices." Thomas looked from one parent to the other, and realization struck him like lightning. "You know something about them, don't you? About their past, about why they're alone." The silence that followed was deafening. George Laurent adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture Thomas had rarely seen in his perpetually controlled father. "Thomas," George finally said, his voice softer, almost pleading, "some things happened, things that can't be undone. Please trust us when we say it's best for everyone if those girls are handed over to the proper authorities." A fierce protectiveness surged within Thomas. "No," he said, voice firm and resolute. "They're staying with me. Whatever you're hiding, whatever mistakes were made in the past, none of it is their fault. And I won't abandon them." "You don't know what you're doing," Elise exclaimed, tears in her eyes. "This will destroy everything." "Then let it be destroyed," Thomas shouted, finally losing his patience. "If the Laurent Empire, our precious legacy, depends on abandoning two innocent children, then maybe it doesn't deserve to exist." George took a step closer, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "You're making a terrible mistake, son. One we're all going to pay for." Thomas straightened his shoulders, meeting his father's gaze. "The only mistake would be letting Sophie and Marie go. Now I'm asking you to leave my house." "Thomas, please." Elise pleaded one last time, but Thomas stood his ground. "Leave, now." With one final look of despair, Elise left the room, followed by George, who paused at the door to cast a warning glance at Thomas. "This isn't over, son. You have no idea what you've set in motion." The moment the door closed behind his parents, Thomas collapsed into an armchair as soon as the door closed behind his parents, his mind spinning. What did they know? What secrets were they hiding? Before he could dive deeper into these questions, the sound of soft footsteps pulled him back to reality. Sophie and Marie stood at the entrance to the living room, their big eyes filled with concern. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie called gently, "is everything okay?" Thomas forced a smile, opening his arms toward the girls. As they hurried into his embrace, he made a silent promise. No matter what happened, no matter what secrets from the past came to light, he would protect these children with all he had. The mystery surrounding Sophie and Marie had just grown even more complicated, but Thomas was determined to solve it. For them, He would face any challenge, even if it meant confronting his own family. 305. Chapter 9. The Keeper of Secrets. The address Dubois had provided led Thomas to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston. The apartment building was old, its paint peeling, with an elevator that looked like it hadn't been serviced in decades. Thomas took the stairs to the 4th floor, his heart pounding faster with each step. He stopped in front of apartment 4B, hesitating briefly before knocking. The sound echoed down the silent hallway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slow, shuffling footsteps approached from the other side. The door opened with a creak, revealing an elderly woman. Her grey hair was pinned in a loose bun, and though her eyes were clouded by age, they still shone with a piercing awareness. "Yes," she asked, her voice frail but firm. "Are you Ms. Anne Dubois?" Thomas inquired, trying to keep his voice calm. The woman narrowed her eyes, studying him for a moment. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Thomas Laurent. I'd like to speak with you about Claire Durand." The name caused a visible reaction. Anne's face paled, her hands trembling slightly on the door handle. For a moment, Thomas thought she might slam the door in his face, but then, with a resigned sigh, she stepped aside. "Come in," she murmured. "But I don't have much to say." The apartment was small and modest, yet immaculately clean. Old photographs adorned the walls, showing a younger Anne alongside a woman Thomas instantly recognized as Claire Durand. Anne settled into a worn-out armchair, gesturing for Thomas to sit on the sofa opposite. "What do you want to know about Claire?" she asked, her tone guarded. Thomas hesitated, picking his words carefully. "I'm trying to understand what happened to her, and to the girls." Anne's eyes widened for a split second. "The girls? Sophie and Marie? You found them?" "They're safe," Thomas assured her, noting the genuine concern in Anne's voice. "But there's a lot I don't understand about their situation." Anne was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting to one of the photos on the wall. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Claire was like a daughter to me. She came to me years ago, pregnant and scared. I helped her, took care of her." "And the father of the girls?" Thomas pressed gently. Anne shot him a sharp look. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is that Claire loved those girls more than anything in this world. She would have done anything to keep them safe." Thomas leaned forward, sensing he was close to something important. Safe from what? From whom? The elderly woman let out a deep sigh, seeming to age another decade in seconds. "There are powerful people in this world, Mr. Laurent. People who would do anything to keep their secrets buried." "What secrets?" Thomas insisted, his frustration growing. "Please, I need to know so I can protect Sophie and Marie." Anne studied him for a long moment, as though peering into his soul. "You look like him," she murmured, almost to herself. "Like who?" But Anne seemed not to hear him, lost in her memories. "I made a promise long ago, a promise to protect Claire and the girls, no matter the cost." Thomas felt his heartbeat quicken. He was so close. "Anne, please, if you know anything that can help." Suddenly, Anne leaned forward, grabbing Thomas's hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Listen to me carefully, young man. Those girls are special. They're the link in a chain many want to break. You must protect them, whatever it takes." "But protect them from what?" Thomas pleaded. Anne opened her mouth to answer, but just then a violent cough overtook her. She doubled over, her fragile body shaking with the effort. Alarmed, Thomas jumped up, unsure what to do. "Anne, are you all right? Should I call a doctor?" The elderly woman shook her head, still coughing. When she finally managed to regain control, she looked exhausted, all her energy spent. "I think you should go now," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. But Thomas began to protest, knowing he was so close to getting answers. Anne, however, was firm. "Please, go. I've already said more than I should. If you truly care about those girls, keep them safe and trust no one." Reluctantly, Thomas rose. He knew he wouldn't get more out of Anne that day. At the door, he turned back one last time. "May I return?" There's still so much I need to know. Anne nodded slowly. Perhaps, but remember, Mr. Laurent, sometimes the truth is too heavy a burden to bear. With those enigmatic words echoing in his mind, Thomas left the apartment. He descended the stairs in a swirl of thoughts and emotions. He was frustrated at not having clear answers, but more determined than ever to uncover the mystery surrounding Sophie and Marie. As he drove back home, Anne's words haunted him. You look like him. Like who? And what was the promise she had made years ago? Thomas knew he would be back. Anne was the key to understanding the girl's past. He was sure of it. And he wouldn't rest until he discovered the truth, no matter how painful it might be. For now, though, all he wanted was to get home to Sophie and Marie, the two little ones who, in such a short time, had become the center of his world. He would do anything to keep them safe, even if it meant facing the powerful people Anne had mentioned. The mystery was far from solved, but Thomas Laurent was prepared for the battle ahead. For the first time in his life, he had something truly worth fighting for. Thomas's office had turned into a maze of papers, photos, and notes. Late nights had become routine, each new piece of information adding more layers to the already complex puzzle surrounding Sophie and Marie. The phone rang, breaking the silence of the early morning. It was Dubois, the private investigator. Mr. Laurent, I have some news, the deep voice announced. I found records regarding the passing of the girl's mother. Thomas sat up straight, instantly alert. What did you find? The details are vague, but it appears there was an accident about 6 months ago. Unfortunately, there's no specific name or date in the files I managed to access. An accident. Thomas jotted down the information, frustrated at the lack of concrete details. Another piece of the puzzle, but still not revealing the entire picture. Determined to get more answers, Thomas decided on a second visit to Anne. Arriving at the rundown building the next morning, he climbed the stairs with quick steps. On the 4th floor, a surprise awaited him. The door to apartment 4B was ajar. Cautiously, Thomas entered. The apartment was empty, with clear signs of a hurried departure. Drawers pulled open, cabinets rummaged through, the bed unmade. Anne, he called, knowing there would be no reply. Attracted by the commotion, a neighbor appeared in the doorway. Looking for Ms. Dubois. She left last night, seemed really upset. Didn't say where she was going. Thomas felt his stomach knot. Have you noticed anything strange recently? Unusual visitors? The neighbor frowned, thinking, well, these past few months, a young woman came by often. Pretty, dark hair, always seemed worried. Thanking the neighbor, Thomas turned his attention back to the apartment. He had a hunch the answer he was seeking might still be in there, hidden. After a thorough search, his persistence paid off. Behind a painting on the wall, he found a small secret compartment. Inside lay a worn journal. Thomas held the journal, feeling the weight of its secrets. Should he read it? It was a violation of privacy, but it might hold the answers he desperately needed. His ethical dilemma was interrupted by the ringing of his phone. It was Madame Elise, the nanny. Mr. Laurent, I'm sorry to bother you, but Sophie had another nightmare. She's very shaken up and asking for you. Thomas didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. Stashing the journal in his coat, he rushed back home. He found Sophie curled up in bed, silent tears running down her face. Shh, it's all right. I'm here, he murmured, holding her gently. It felt so real, Sophie sobbed. The accident, so much water, Mom screaming. Thomas felt his heart clench. What accident, sweetheart? But Sophie just shook her head, burying her face against him. I can't talk about it. It's a secret. Mom said it was dangerous. Rocking her softly, Thomas felt a fierce determination rise within him. Whatever threat hovered over these children, he would face it. He would protect Sophie and Marie at all costs. Once Sophie finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted from crying, Thomas tucked her in tenderly. Watching her now peaceful face, he made a silent vow. He would solve this mystery, no matter the price. Leaving the room quietly, Thomas returned to his office. Anne's journal weighed heavily in his pocket. a constant temptation. He placed it on his desk, staring at it for long minutes. His conscience warred against his desperate need for answers, but the image of Sophie's tears, of nightmares no child should have, decided it for him. With a long sigh, Thomas opened the journal. The first words jumped off the page, making his heart skip a beat. "Dearest friend, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened. It's time to tell the truth." Thomas blinked, stunned. Right there, in the first lines, was the promise of revelations that could change everything. He hesitated for a moment, aware that once he continued reading, there'd be no going back. With trembling hands, he turned the page. Every word felt laden with years of hidden truths, of painful realities about to be exposed. As he read, Thomas felt as though the ground were giving way beneath him. Connections that once seemed impossible began forming a horrifying logic. Familiar names appeared in unexpected contexts, casting new light on past events. When he finally reached the last page, Thomas was pale, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and conflicting thoughts. The mystery surrounding Sophie and Marie was far bigger and more complex than he had ever imagined. Looking at the clock, Thomas realized he had spent hours reading. Dawn was already breaking, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. A new day was beginning, yet inside the Laurent mansion, everything felt transformed overnight. Standing up, he walked over to the window. Outside, the world kept turning, oblivious to the revelations he had just uncovered. But here in his home, nothing would ever be the same again. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, letting the reality of what he had read sink in. When he opened them, a new resolve shone there. No matter how hard the road ahead, he would do whatever it took to protect Sophie and Marie. The mystery was still not fully unraveled, but now Thomas held the key pieces of the puzzle, and with that knowledge came a huge responsibility. Returning to his desk, Thomas began drafting a plan. The day that was dawning would bring new challenges, inevitable confrontations and difficult decisions. But for the first time since Sophie and Marie had come into his life, he felt he was on the right track. With one last glance at the journal that had changed everything, Thomas Laurent prepared to face the consequences of the truth he had just discovered. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would do anything to keep Sophie and Marie safe, no matter the cost. Thomas settled into his armchair, Anne's journal feeling heavy in his hands as though it were made of lead. With a deep breath, he opened the worn cover and began to read. The first few pages recounted the story of a young mother whose name had been carefully crossed out. Thomas assumed it was Sophie and Marie's mother. The account was heartbreaking. A single woman struggling to raise two little girls in a world that seemed to conspire against her at every turn. "Today they smiled for the first time," read one entry. "In that moment, I knew I would do anything to protect them. Anything." As he read on, Thomas felt his stomach tighten. The entries slowly changed in tone, shifting from hope and determination to fear and paranoia. "They're watching me. I'm sure of it. Yesterday I saw a car parked outside for hours. When I went out to confront them, they sped away. What do they want?" Another entry a few pages later. "I received another threat today. They say they'll take the girls away if I don't cooperate. But how can I? What they're asking for? It's unthinkable. I need to find a way out." Thomas frowned, trying to decode the mystery behind these words. Who were they? What did they want from this woman? And why were the girls so important? Financial hardship was also a constant theme in the journal. Unpaid bills, lost jobs, the constant struggle to put food on the table. "I had to choose between paying rent or buying the girls' medication. What kind of choice is that for a mother to make?" As he continued reading, Thomas couldn't help but notice that certain events in the journal strangely coincided with moments in his own past. A scratched-out date, still partially visible, seemed to mark the day he had made his first major business acquisition. Another entry talked about a powerful man making an unexpected visit. On the same day, Thomas remembered his father disappearing for hours, only to return home agitated and distant. Long-buried memories began to surface. whispered conversations between his parents that abruptly ended whenever he entered the room, the odd looks he got from some of his father's business associates. Small details that had meant nothing at the time, but now seemed like puzzle pieces forming a bigger picture. One entry in particular made Thomas pause, his heart racing. He doesn't even know he's a father. How can I tell him now, after all this time? And even if I did, what would change? They'd never leave us alone. Thomas reread this passage multiple times, his mind spinning with the implications. Could it be? It seemed impossible. And yet, as he neared the end of the journal, the entries grew more frantic, more desperate. They're closing in, I can feel it. I need to get the girls out of here, take them somewhere safe. But where? How can I protect them from something so big, so powerful? The second to last entry made Thomas hold his breath. I've made my decision. I'll tell everything. The truth must come out, no matter the consequences. I've prepared a package with all the evidence. If something happens to me, Anne knows what to do. The girls need to learn the truth about their father, about their inheritance. It's the only way to keep them truly safe. The final page contained only a single sentence, scrawled in a trembling hand. Forgive me, my love. I hope someday you'll understand. Thomas closed the journal, his mind swirling with emotions and conflicting thoughts. The revelations within were shocking, disturbing, and at the same time they offered clarity. Standing up, he walked to the window, gazing at the garden where Sophie and Marie were happily playing, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. How different life could have been if... Thomas shook his head, pushing away the flood of what-ifs threatening to overwhelm him. There was no time for regret or speculation. What mattered now was the future, Sophie and Marie's future. Returning to his desk, Thomas jotted down quick notes. Names mentioned in the journal, crucial dates, events that mirrored his own life. Every detail might be vital for unraveling the bigger mystery. One thing was clear. The package of evidence referenced in the journal was key to everything. If he could find it, he would have all the answers he sought. Thomas picked up his phone and dialed Dubois' number. I need you to find Anne, he instructed the moment the investigator answered, and I need you to do it fast. She holds vital information. Hanging up, Thomas refocused on the mental map covering the wall of his office. With the journal's new details, he started drawing new connections, filling in gaps that had previously seemed unbridgeable. The truth was there, right in front of him, yet still out of reach. Like the last pieces of a nearly complete jigsaw puzzle, he just needed a few more clues to see the whole picture. Thomas clenched his fists, a fierce determination taking hold. He would find those final pieces, no matter the cost. For the first time in his life, he had something genuinely worth fighting for. Once more, he glanced out the window, watching Sophie and Marie. He made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, confront whoever was behind this, and ensure these two innocent children had the safe, happy future they deserved. The path ahead would be challenging, possibly even dangerous, but Thomas Laurent was ready for it. With the journal as his guide and his love for Sophie and Marie as his motivation, he would overcome any obstacle. The truth would be revealed, and when it was, nothing would ever be the same. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the lace curtains in Sophie and Marie's room, creating playful patterns on the floor. Thomas stood by the door, a gentle smile on his face, watching the twins as they played enthusiastically. It looked like an ordinary day at the Laurent mansion, or so it seemed. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie called out, her eyes sparkling with excitement, "come see the castle we built." Thomas stepped into the room, admiring the elaborate structure made of colorful blocks and bedsheets. "Impressive," he praised her, squatting down to examine their fortress. Marie, always the more adventurous of the two, decided it was the perfect moment for a surprise attack. With a playful war cry worthy of a tiny warrior, she jumped out from behind a pile of pillows, aiming straight for Thomas. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. In her excitement, Marie tripped on a forgotten toy on the floor. Her arms flailed wildly, looking for balance. As she fell, she grabbed onto the old, tattered backpack the girls always kept nearby. pulling it down with her. The backpack tipped over, spilling its contents across the floor like confetti at a party. Then, sliding out from between the pages of a children's book, a single photograph fluttered gently down like a stray leaf. Thomas, who had instinctively moved to catch Marie, froze the moment he saw the image. The photo, its edges slightly yellowed, showed a young woman beaming at the camera. In her arms, two identical infant girls slept peacefully. A green park in the background suggested a sunny day, but it wasn't just the tender scene that made Thomas's heart skip a beat. It was the woman's face. Claire. Like a film running at high speed, memories flooded his mind. Claire, with her brilliant green eyes and contagious smile. Claire laughing at his bad jokes during that magical summer in Santa Barbara. Claire crying in his arms the night they said goodbye, promising they would meet again someday. Claire, the first and only true love of his life. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie's worried voice brought him back to the present. "Are you okay?" Thomas blinked, realizing tears had gathered in his eyes. With trembling hands, he picked up the photograph. "Girls," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "could you tell me about this picture?" Sophie and Marie exchanged looks, sharing another silent conversation. At last, Marie spoke. "That's our mom," she said simply, a tinge of sadness coloring her childish voice. Thomas nodded, struggling to keep his composure. "And what happened to her?" The girls exchanged another glance. Sophie, the more sensitive one, came closer to Thomas, gently touching his arm. "Mom went to the stars," she whispered. "She said that from there she could protect us better." Thomas felt his heart break. "To the stars," he repeated softly. Marie nodded solemnly. "Yes, after the accident. She was scared. She said bad people were after us. One night she hugged us really tight and said she had to go, but she'd always be watching." The puzzle pieces began falling into place in Thomas's mind, forming a painful, shocking picture. "Girls," he started carefully, "do you remember your mom ever mentioning your father?" The twins fell silent for a moment, thinking. Finally, Sophie spoke in a near whisper. "Mom sometimes looked at a picture hidden in her journal. She would cry and say that was our dad, but he didn't know about us. She said he was an important man," Marie added, "and that it was safer this way." Thomas felt as though the floor had vanished beneath him. The implications of what the girls were saying, combined with the photo in his hands and Anne's journal, were overwhelming. "Mr. Thomas," Sophie's voice pulled him from his spiral of thoughts. "Why are you crying?" Only then did he realize tears were streaming down his cheeks. Pulling both girls into a tight embrace, Thomas struggled to find the right words. "Sophie, Marie," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "A long time ago, I met an amazing woman named Claire. We loved each other very much, but sometimes life separates people, even when they don't want it to." The twins watched him with wide eyes, hanging on every word. "I never knew," Thomas continued, "that our love had given me something so precious, you two." Marie was the first to grasp it, her eyes going even wider. "Mr. Thomas, are you our dad?" The world seemed to stop for a moment. Thomas nodded, unable to hold back his tears. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your father." What followed was an explosion of emotions. Sophie and Marie leaped into Thomas's arms, weeping and laughing all at once. Questions came pouring out, some answered, others still a mystery. Thomas held them tight, overwhelmed by the miracle of these two little girls, his daughters, the legacy of his love for Claire. As the afternoon wore on, turning into evening, the three stayed together, sharing stories, tears and laughter. Thomas told them about how he met Claire, about that magical summer they'd spent together, about how he'd lost her. Sophie and Marie, in turn, recounted precious memories of their mother, little details that brought Claire back to life through their words. When the twins finally fell asleep, exhausted by the day's emotional roller coaster, Thomas remained by their side, watching their peaceful faces. The truth had come out, but he knew it was only the beginning. There were still mysteries to solve and dangers to face. But now, with the knowledge that Sophie and Marie were truly his daughters, Thomas felt a renewed determination. He would protect his girls at all costs. He would find out what really happened to Claire, and above all, he would ensure that the love and happiness they'd found would never again be taken from them. With one last look at Claire's photo, now carefully placed on the bedside table, Thomas made a silent promise. He would honor her memory by caring for and loving the daughters she had so fiercely shielded. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Laurent family had found its true purpose, and nothing would ever be the same. The engine of Thomas's car had barely died when he jumped out, his determined footsteps echoing at the entrance of the Laurent estate. The air felt charged, as though the house itself knew that long-buried truths were about to come to light. Philippe, the butler, opened the door before Thomas could reach for the handle. "Your parents are in the living room, sir," he informed, his tone wary. Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. George and Elise Laurent sat stiffly, both wearing expressions of deep worry and apprehension. "Thomas," his father began, standing up, "what's going on? Your phone call." But Thomas cut him off, his voice trembling with pent-up emotion. "Enough lies," he said, pulling out the photo of Claire and the infant twins from his pocket. "I want the truth." "All of it?" Elise gasped when she saw the picture, her face paling noticeably. Where did you get that?" "That doesn't matter," Thomas answered, his gaze fixed on his mother. "What matters is that I know. I know about Claire. I know about my daughters." The silence that followed was deafening. George looked in confusion from Thomas to Elise, clearly at a loss. "What is he talking about, Elise?" Thomas's mother sank onto the sofa, tears sliding down her face. "Oh, Thomas," she sobbed, "I'm so sorry. I truly am." Thomas took a step closer, his anger giving way to a desperate need for understanding. "Why, Mom? Why did you do it?" Elise took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "It was years ago. You had just taken over the company. You were at the peak of your career when we found out about Claire, about the pregnancy. We panicked." "Found out?" George interrupted, his voice carrying shock. "Elise, what are you talking about?" Elise threw her husband a pleading look. "Forgive me, George. I never told you everything back then. I thought I was protecting our family." Thomas felt his breathing quicken. "Keep talking, Mom. I need all of it." With a trembling sigh, Elise began to unravel the painful truth. She spoke of discovering Claire's pregnancy through an anonymous tip, how she feared a scandal that could destroy the family name and derail Thomas's bright future. I threatened her," Elise confessed, her voice a near whisper. "I told her we would ruin her life, that she'd never have peace unless she disappeared. I offered a lot of money for her to vanish and never contact you again." George sank into an armchair, shock etched across his face. "Elise, how could you? Without telling me." "I thought I was protecting all of us," Elise cried. "Thomas, you had such a promising road ahead. A baby, let alone twins, would have ruined everything." Thomas felt a wave of nausea as he listened to his mother's words. "Ruined? They're my daughters, Mom, my own flesh and blood. How could you keep them from me?" "Keep Claire away? I didn't know," George exclaimed, looking genuinely disturbed. "Elise, you told me Claire decided to leave on her own, that she didn't want to hurt Thomas's career." Elise shook her head, tears streaming down. I lied to everyone. Claire, she fought back, you know. She wanted to tell you, Thomas. But I convinced her it would be better this way, that you'd have a better life without this burden." Thomas felt as though each word was a knife twisting in his chest. "A burden? Is that how you saw my daughters? As a burden?" Suddenly, a memory popped into Thomas's mind. "The safe," he muttered. "That hidden safe in your closet, Mum. What's inside it?" Elise's face went even whiter. "How did you—" Without waiting for her reply, Thomas headed for his parents' bedroom, with George and Elise following close behind. At the back of the closet, behind a false panel, was the safe Thomas had glimpsed by accident as a child. "The combination, Mom," he demanded. With trembling hands, Elise entered the code. The safe clicked softly and swung open, revealing its contents: piles of letters, photos, and what looked like a diary. Thomas picked up the first letter, instantly recognizing Claire's handwriting. Reading it, he felt his heart break. Claire, begging to see Thomas, to tell him the truth. Photos of the newborn twins, each marked with dates and affectionate notes on the back. "How you kept all of this?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "All these years?" Elise nodded, tears quietly falling. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of them. They were proof they existed, that they were real." George took one of the photos, his eyes filling with tears at the sight of the granddaughters he had never met. "My God, Elise. What did we do?" Thomas continued going through the documents until a familiar name caught his eye. "Anne? Anne Dubois?" Elise nodded again. She was my informant. She kept me updated on Claire and the girls over the years. Deep down, I guess I needed to be sure they were okay. The revelation that Anne, the same woman Thomas had recently visited, was involved from the start was yet another shock. Everything now connected with painful clarity. The silence that followed was laden with regret, pain, and truths long suppressed. Finally, George spoke, his voice trembling. "Thomas and son, there are no words to describe how sorry we are. What we did, it's unforgivable." Elise approached Thomas hesitantly, her eyes pleading. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but believe me, I thought I was doing what was best for you. I was so wrong, terribly wrong." Thomas looked at his parents, people he had always seen as pillars of strength and integrity, now reduced to remorseful, guilt-ridden shells. Part of him wanted to scream, to make them pay for every moment he had lost with his daughters. But another part, the part that now understood the unconditional love of a parent, could see the fear and misguided concern that had driven them to such drastic measures. "I'll need time," Thomas finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "A lot of time. What you did, it changed the course of so many lives. But now, what matters most is Sophie and Marie. They're my priority." Elise and George nodded, tears silently streaming down their faces. "They are your granddaughters," Thomas continued. "If you want to be part of their lives, you'll have to prove you deserve it, not for me, but for them." With those words, Thomas gathered up the letters and photos from the safe. As he left the room, he paused at the door, looking back at his parents one last time. "The truth is finally out," he said softly. "Now it's up to us to decide what we do with it." Heading out of the Laurent estate, Thomas felt as though a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders, only to be replaced by another. The past had been laid bare, but the future was still uncertain. One thing, however, was sure: he would do everything in his power to give Sophie and Marie the love, safety, and family they had always deserved. And perhaps, in time, the wounds of the past could begin to heal, paving the way for a new chapter in the Laurent family's story. The attorney's office was silent, save for the scratching of a pen on paper. Thomas, heart pounding, signed the final document. It was official. Sophie and Marie were legally recognized as his daughters. Stepping outside, Thomas was greeted by two pairs of anxious eyes. "Is it done?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. Thomas knelt down, opening his arms. "Yes, my little ones. It's official now. I'm your father in everyone's eyes." The girls flung themselves into his arms, laughing and crying all at once. It was a moment Thomas would never forget. Back at the Laurent estate, the transformation was unmistakable. What had once been a cold, austere space now pulsed with warmth and life. Colorful drawings decorated the walls, toys were strategically scattered, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls. Thomas had asked Anne to move in with them. Though reluctant at first, she eventually agreed, touched by the genuine care and warmth Thomas and the girls extended to her. "It's like the house has finally woken up from a long slumber," Anne remarked one afternoon, watching Sophie and Marie play in the garden. Thomas nodded, smiling. They brought life back to this place and back to me. Adapting to this new life wasn't without its challenges. Thomas, who was used to managing complex business deals, now found himself learning how to braid hair and distinguish between a simple cold and the flu. But every small victory, every shared smile, strengthened the bond between him and his daughters, and, once frail and sickly, seemed to regain her vitality with each passing day. The girl's infectious energy and the estate's newfound warmth worked wonders for her health. Inspired by Claire's struggles and by the joy Sophie and Marie had brought him, Thomas set up the Claire Foundation, dedicated to helping single mothers in vulnerable situations. It was his way of honoring Claire's legacy, ensuring that other children could have a better chance at life. Reconciling with George and Elise Laurent was a gradual process. The twins, with their natural charm, played a huge role in melting their grandparents' hearts. Slowly, Sunday lunches and afternoons at the park became part of the new family routine. Sophie's nightmares, once frequent and harrowing, began to subside. Thomas spent many nights by her side, whispering words of comfort and safety. With love and patience, Sophie learned to face her fears. Their first Christmas together was unforgettable. The estate, previously decorated with subtlety, now sparkled with lights and ornaments. The aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air, mingling with the sound of holiday tunes. "I've never seen the estate look so beautiful," commented Philippe, the butler, tears glistening in his eyes. The twins' birthday was marked by a big party on the grounds,